Every business, regardless of its size, must provide its employees with safe working conditions. And considering the range of potential hazards, from asbestos to slippery stairs to excessive noise, that can be difficult for a small business. And why should everyone be so concerned about job safety and health? Because each year, approximately 6,000 employees in this country die from workplace injuries, while another 50,000 die from illnesses caused by exposure to workplace hazards. In addition, 6 million workers suffer non-fatal workplace injuries at an annual cost to U.S. businesses of more than $125 billion. Standards and rules for safe working conditions, tools, equipment, facilities, and processes are set by the Labor Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. OSHA standards apply to every private employer with one or more employees, except for those in industries covered by other federal job safety legislation. Today, roughly 93 million employees across the country are protected by state and federal OSHA programs. But even with adequate safety measures, accidents do happen. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in this TV special, Safety on the Job, Victor Marache's story. To examine how Tony Gentile, partner at Godatsky and Gentile, successfully got justice for Victor. On July 26, 2006, Victor Marache, a humble, modest, hardworking 38-year-old man, was severely burned over approximately 30% of his body when a wood floor lacquer sealer refinishing product spontaneously combusted while he was assisting his supervisor in applying it. Engulfed in flames from head to toe and in shock, Victor jumped out of a window and ran 6 or 7 blocks to his employer's office. He was hospitalized for 4 months, which included his confinement to the burn unit. He suffered multiple skin grafting for treatment of his burns, and he also sustained severe orthopedic injuries to his hip and elbow, requiring surgery. Victor also developed gastrointestinal bleeding and bowel obstruction as a result of the pain medication and his inability to intake foods. Upon discharge from the hospital, Victor was admitted to a nursing care facility and remained there for an additional 5 months. During that time, he underwent abdominal surgery on his intestines for removal of the bowel obstruction. Following discharge from the nursing care center, he remained under constant orthopedic care and rehabilitation therapy for the injuries to his hip and elbow. He was also evaluated by a plastic surgeon for the loss of pigmentation and scarring caused by the burns and resultant grafting. However, the disfigurement and the loss of pigmentation to his head, ears, torso, and limbs could not be improved. All of Victor's injuries were permanent and totally disabling. Tony Gentile had some real major challenges to overcome to win this case due to the very precise scientific principles involved, which were very difficult to express in layman's terms to a judge and a jury without any knowledge of such technicalities. But on the brink of trial, one defendant, who had a history of rarely settling, agreed to pay $4 million. Plus, several months later, Tony successfully won a verdict against the remaining defendants for Victor for an additional $15 million. Godatsky and Gentile are one of New York's premier construction accident law firms. These lawyers with hard hats have a long and proud tradition of representing laborers of all kinds who have been injured on the job. They are well versed in labor law and have recovered millions of dollars on behalf of injured workers. The firm has also represented union and non-union workers, laborers, electricians, carpenters, sheet metal workers, plumbers, iron workers, and steam fitters. They also represent documented as well as undocumented workers. Today, the Insider Exclusive takes an inside look at the New York law firm of Godatsky and Gentile and Tony Gentile's amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate, which continued to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve, making sure juries understand how injuries can truly devastate a person's personal and professional life. Remember, Tony won't be outworked, and he will not rest until justice is done for his clients. His success in the courtroom speaks for itself. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from New York City. It is my great pleasure to introduce Tony Gentile to the show. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Good morning.
Tell us a little bit about your law firm and what kind of law you generally practice.
Well, our firm specializes in handling serious injury cases, people who have been hurt in a variety of ways, construction accidents, on-the-job accidents, at home and in the car, and most significantly where doctors and hospitals have committed malpractice.
And generally these injuries are dramatic. The life changers.
They change not only the individual's life, or unfortunately sometimes death, but also the families, the dependents, the children, the wives, the husbands, all their life.
One of the reasons we love doing these shows is because these people, on the average, could never afford a law firm or a lawyer if they had to pay them by the hour to represent them.
Absolutely.
So they come to law firms like your own who evaluate cases to see the merit, right? And you invest, your firm invests a lot of time and money in pursuing justice, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have to expend a tremendous sum of money in order to promote the case, forward the case, develop the case.
Investigate it.
Oh, investigate as well as learn about the science of the case when it involves technical things like on-the-job injuries and what the rules of construction are and that type of thing.
Right. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when you call an expert who's going to appear in court, some of these experts can run $25,000 for the day, right?
Easily. Easily. I just had one on the witness stand, was $550 an hour. And if you have any type of volume to your work, that runs very, very high.
Today we have a case that we want to talk about, Victor Marache.
In point, it's a case that I expended $100,000 from beginning to end on before any trial.
And it was a case that presented a lot of challenges and difficulties. But before we get into that, tell our audience about who Victor is.
Victor Marache was a immigrant from the Dominican Republic who learned the construction trade actually in the island of Jamaica and then came to the Bronx. But the best job he could get was working as a super for a landlord, and then he graduated to doing renovations commercially within the New York City area for this landlord. And it was in that activity that he was gravely injured in August of 2006.
And what happened in 2006?
He was finishing a floor. Actually, he was simply carrying a pail around while his boss was applying a lacquer sealer to a floor. And while they were doing that, a wood floor in an apartment building, within seconds, as they were finishing the lacquer coat, the apartment became engulfed in a flash fire. It caused him to be blown back a step. He ignited along with his co-worker. They ran through the apartment. He was engulfed in flames, jumped out a window, and then Victor ran 7 blocks to the office, screaming, smoking from his head and his shoulders. And then at the office they called an ambulance, and by the time he got to St. Barnabas Hospital, he had 35% body burns of his body, and he was taken to New York Cornell almost immediately on IVs, and as the photograph showed, horrifically burned from head through his torso and his legs.
Now, when he was there, what did they discover? What did the doctors say, besides the burn injuries?
Well, besides the burn injuries, he was put in a coma, a drug-induced coma for 35 days in order so that they could cut away the skin on every 2 days they would cut away the skin, and every other day they would actually, while drugged, put him into a tank so that they could rip off the dead skin. You have to get clean skin in order for the tissue to grow. Because of being so badly burned, he started to grow. I thought he had broken his hip when he had jumped out the window, but that did not happen. As time went on, he had a terrible hip condition, a subluxed hip, and he would kind of waddle with his gait when he finally got around after months in the hospital. And what happens to burn victims is they actually grow bone in their muscle.
And you discovered this later on. In fact, we have an X-ray that we're going to show right now where the bone is growing kind of isolated right in the muscle, isn't it?
What you're seeing on the X-ray is stunning because this X-ray was taken after a procedure to clean out the bone.
Yeah.
He continued to grow bone for years afterwards. It's a phenomenon that's called hypertrophic bone formation, and it requires either a cutting away and constant physical therapy in order for him to recover from his injury.
Not all burn victims suffer this, though, do they?
No, it's a known percentage, but no one knows why.
Right.
No one knows how. It just happens, and it happened to Victor,
now,
unfortunately.
Before we get into how your legal strategy about how you won this case, how did the case come to you in the first place?
The case came to me from a lawyer who handles cases, as most of our cases do. Other lawyers refer us cases, but this case came to us from a lawyer who handles on-the-job injuries.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we did when we got the case, and Victor was in the hospital, in addition to documenting his injuries, was to see what right to recovery he had. Unfortunately, in New York, when you have an on-the-job injury and you're working for your employer, as he was, the landlord, even though he was doing construction, he was unable to sue his employer, and he was unable to sue the owner of the building.
Because of why?
Because in New York, the workers' compensation law precludes that.
So in other words, if you're going to collect workman's compensation, you can't sue your employer.
Or a derivative company of your employer, like the owner of a building.
What if you choose not to accept workers' compensation? Can you sue your employer?
No, not in New York. You don't have that choice. You're forced to accept workers' compensation, and all workers' compensation did was pay for medical at a given rate and a very minimal amount of lost earnings and lost income. So
this brings us to your evaluation of the case. Who are you going to sue?
Well, the first thing that and the only thing that I could look at was the product itself.
Yeah.
How did this sudden flash fire occur? And if you take a look at the photographs of the apartment, you'll see that there were scorch burns, and the fire department came in and put as a cause of the fire, the source of the fire was the lacquer sealer.
Yeah.
And the cause of the ignition was a refrigerator or a stove. Well, after we did investigation, we saw that the stove was turned off, but the refrigerator may or may not have been plugged in. We weren't sure at that point, and we couldn't speak to Victor to get any information from him, and he wasn't really in charge of the site. So we had a problem. However, what we did was locate the lacquer sealer, and we had it analyzed. And the lacquer sealer, we were able to get a model can, and the lacquer sealer, once analyzed, we discovered something shocking, that it had a flash point, meaning it ignited with a flame at -4 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
-4 degrees Fahrenheit is a little bit less flammable than gasoline. So essentially, they were pouring gasoline on a floor in the city of New York.
Right.
That's how flammable the substance was. So the next thing to do was and we were very fortunate, the landlord was a good employer, and he gave us the labels and the place where this was purchased, and we got a model. We purchased a can of it, and we looked at the labeling. Once I saw the labeling, I did a litigation check on this product, and then I discovered something stunning. I didn't believe it, that most of the cases, all the cases that I saw, were lost, and lost on appeal, never even got to a jury against this distributor in Yonkers. And this was obviously very disappointing to me. So I had to analyze the records of those cases, and I came upon an expert in those cases, and he explained to me what the flaws were in those former cases. And I was able to determine that indeed the appropriate theory, the legal theory that we could get Victor some help and some compensation, was that the warnings on the label were defective. They fell below the standard that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration had promulgated years before. And that caused me to start an inadequate warning case against the distributor in Yonkers and the retailer in New York City.
Now, every lawyer prior to that time who had lost a case had sued under the issue of product liability.
Product liability, dangerous product.
Yeah.
Saying that this product was dangerous
Yeah.
and defective as a dangerous product. The manufacturer and the distributors defended that in our system by saying that, oh no, this is the only product available because this lacquer sealer, while highly flammable, had a very, very valuable asset. It dried in 15 minutes,
Yeah.
but it left the vapor behind, the dangerous vapor behind.
Now, incidentally, this lacquer is not allowed to be used in the city of New York. Is
That
right?
we learned later.
Yeah.
It was a stealth provision. The fire department didn't even know about it. The fire marshal who investigated the case didn't know about it, but this had been banned for use within the city of New York because of its danger, and there was a requirement that it had to be put upon the can and a display at the point of sale.
So you went after the distributor and the retailer.
Yes, at first.
Yeah.
Then I discovered that this stuff, this lacquer sealer, was actually made by Akzo Nobel Corporation from the Netherlands in North Carolina and shipped to New York to this distributor, and it was a unique product just for this distributor in New York. And about 6 months to a year into the litigation in the Bronx, I discovered that Akzo Nobel was really the manufacturer, so I started an immediate action against them. They removed me to federal court. They could. And I had to run 2 parallel cases in both the federal court and in the state court.
And they moved you to federal court because they're based out of North Carolina.
Correct,
Okay.
and what's called diversity.
Yeah.
That happened to be a very, very fortunate thing because the federal court moved the discovery very, very quickly, and I discovered the uniqueness of the product. But against the manufacturer in the United States, there is a very, very significant defense that they have. It's called the bulk supply doctrine. And that is that when a manufacturer ships this material in 50-gallon drums to a local distributor who then subdivides it to the consumer, even though it's the same material, their liability is only to the distributor unless you can show that they knew that a consumer, someone would be using it downstream. So what happened was all those defendants' verdicts that they got, all those dismissals that the distributor and the manufacturer got, I used them to say, hey, you knew about this product. You knew it was being used in the city of New York. You knew that this stuff was burning people and was dangerous.
Even though you won the cases, you were aware of it.
Yes, yeah.
because the case had been filed.
Right. So I said, and I listed the cases,
Yeah.
and Judge Stein in the federal court, in a motion, the submissions were as high off the floor as my hand is, on both sides. And the Judge Stein wrote a decision in which, for the first time, he denied Akzo Nobel summary judgment, saying that they violated OSHA standards on warnings, that little kernel, and that they failed to warn about how to remove these vapors properly while working, and that they had to have known that it was being used prior to this accident.
Now, they settled for $4 million, right?
That's correct.
The last thing I want to talk about here is, as a trial lawyer, you are a part of a very distinguished, eminent group, the International Trial Lawyers Association, right?
Yes.
And there's only 500 lawyers in the United States that are members of this group, right?
Yes.
And the only way you get in there is somebody passes on and there's a vacancy, right?
Actually, it's a 6-month vetting process where they write every judge in the state and many, many lawyers within the state.
The reason I bring this up is because there are, I don't know how many lawyers in the United States, lots, okay? But there's only 500 members of this group, and we've interviewed a lot of distinguished lawyers like yourself. What makes your trial work much better than many other lawyers out there?
I think...
Is it the homework, the investigation, the dedication?
Well, it's all those things, but I think that members of the International who are vetted, and it's the highest, one of the highest achievements you could ever have and receive, is sincerity, concern, and dedication to a person. The great advantage to doing this type of trial work, be it personal injury or criminal, is one cause, one person. You put your whole soul, your whole strength, set aside everything else in your life, and dedicate it to that cause. And that is not only a wonderful, wonderful occupation and livelihood, it gives you wind to your back.
Right.
It makes you feel good. I've done commercial cases where people are suing other people over contracts and breach of fiduciary duty. There is nothing like representing a Victor Marache. Nothing like representing a man who has so little and deprived of so much, and giving him the chance in court to try his cause and concern.
It's all about winning a great cause. Well, we want to thank you for spending some time with us today, and you did a great job. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.